Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everybody. We're back. And yeah, it's been a very interesting day up to now. We've been juggling a lot of ideas and sorry, I'm going to stop punning while I juggle. That's not really what we're here for. We're here to see more panelists. And this next set of panelists to me is a really exciting bunch. It's going to be about the youth and innovation and heritage. So there's a series of 4 panelists. We've got our moderator, Karen Froman. Karen, are you there? Yeah.
Hi.
I see you. There you are, Karen. Karen, can I let you take over and introduce everybody? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Yep.
All right. Well, let's get right into it. And Karen, take it away.
Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to the last panel of the day. Our first panelist is Caleb Cantelon, who will be discussing and critiquing the Manitoba Heritage Act. He's a fifth-year honors student majoring in anthropology at the University of Manitoba. And after completing his undergrad, he hopes to stay in Manitoba and pursue a graduate degree in archaeology. Caleb is interested in pre-contact Indigenous ceramics and has participated in several excavations with the MAS and Brandon University in Southwest Manitoba, digging at the Good site as well as the Olsen site. Caleb also hopes to conduct cultural resource management work with the goal of becoming more familiarized with the state of provincial heritage preservation. Looks forward to his future in Manitoba archaeology, as well as becoming more involved in the provincial heritage sector. So welcome, Caleb.
Hi, thank you. I trust you can hear me. Excellent. Firstly, I'd like to apologize. My nose spontaneously begins to bleed. It's been one of those days. All right, and also my talk is focusing a little bit more on really just my experience as a young person coming into heritage and as like an anthropology major, and then sort of a critique of legislation kind of comes into that a little bit later. So I will be touching on a lot of other stuff as well. Okay. So firstly, I'd like to preface this with the fact that I'll be mostly talking about my experience with heritage as it relates to archaeology, as I'm an archaeologist, and that's where my experience primarily lies. I'm going to talk about how I first got involved in Manitoban archaeology, my future plans as someone entering into a discipline directly relating to heritage, and some of the issues I have with various things relating to all of this that I've encountered thus far, and generally just my perspective as someone entering the discipline. Also, I'm reading off a script, so I apologize if I'm either talking fast or monotone. So heritage and local history was never really a super significant part of my life until after I had become an anthropology major at the University of Manitoba. I'd visited the Threshermen's Museum outside Morden. I'd gone to Upper Fort Garry, Festival de Voyageurs, and I'd learned about the Métis in high school. But university was the first time I'd ever really thought about what heritage really is as it relates to people today, and not just viewed it as, something like a bit of interesting historical trivia, and truth be told, I'd actually never even heard of anthropology a week before I officially switched my major to it. I was coming out of a failed math exam my first year, and I wasn't going to meet the requirements for computer science. So I decided that I wanted to do something relating to history instead. I saw the university held archaeology courses, and that's the route that I decided to take. It wasn't until my field school at Brandon University, which I took after my third year at U of M, that I was officially introduced to Indigenous history and heritage, as the field school was at a pre-contact Indigenous site. My Brandon U field school was also the reason I ultimately decided I wanted to stay in Manitoba, as opposed to pursuing other paths that had been presented to me, such as research in the Mediterranean or research in the Near East, such as Israel, Palestine. Now, through my field school director, Alicia Gooden, I learned about the Manitoba Archaeological Society, or the MAS, of which I'm now a member. And through the MAS, I was given the opportunity to excavate at the Olsen site outside Melita in Southwest Manitoba for the last 2 years. Over this time, I've enjoyed attending MAS meetings as a student representative at U of M, as well as their recent annual conference, which was held only a couple weeks ago. If you've never heard of it, I recommend signing up for next year. It was a lot of fun. The conference granted me the opportunity to meet with not only researchers, but also cultural resource management professionals, the people responsible for conducting heritage impact assessments prior to construction and development, where it's mandated by law. This is what I plan on doing after I graduate from school this year, and prior to my grad school, which is something I hope to do in the future at some point. Now, cultural resource management, or CRM, was also something that I'd never heard of prior to becoming an anthropology major. Fortunately, however, U of M recently started offering an actual cultural resource management class. It takes students through the ins and outs of heritage legislation in Canada, archaeological opinions on what some would call salvage archaeology, or even archaeology for hire, the dynamics that can exist when companies become stakeholders in heritage assessments, and we even filled out mock permit applications for HRB. I really appreciate this edition, as I feel I gained a lot of useful perspectives on CRM and its relation to heritage in Canada and Manitoba that I otherwise would likely not have gained. In transitioning straight from being a student with academic field experience straight to CRM was certainly an anxiety of mine, and I feel educating students on what exactly CRM is and sort of what to expect would result in more people getting into the field, which I feel is important. This is especially important as new archaeologists taught in a modern fashion are a necessity if we ever hope for important aspects relating to heritage, such as preservation and legislation, to adapt to changing understandings. In the CRM course, we also covered how CRM operates within the legislative frameworks of the different provinces, and thus what kinds of laws relating to heritage preservation have been passed in Canada, and especially in Manitoba. And this was one thing that I wanted to talk about specifically. As I transitioned from being a student to an active member in a heritage-related discipline in Manitoba, I can't help but feel frustrated, or maybe confused is a better term. Really, it's just been, the transition's been jarring. As a student at U of M, a huge portion of my education in anthropology was largely geared towards understanding the shortcomings of how heritage and cultures have been treated in the past, and growing to understand how anthropologists' ethical principles have evolved towards a more better, inclusive, and collaborative discipline. The more and more I came to learn about how heritage preservation is actually legislated, however, the more apparent it became and continues to become to me that there's a disconnect between the people creating the laws surrounding how heritage should be managed and the people who are actually responsible for managing the heritage here in Manitoba. What I was taught on how heritage should best be managed responsibly and in a manner which is fair to everyone, especially to the communities whose heritage it is in the first place, is not what's practiced here in Manitoba. The legislation in place was implemented almost double my lifetime ago, and it hasn't changed since then. What laws there are don't adequately protect what needs to be protected, though I suppose that doesn't really matter at the end of the day, since a lot of times it doesn't really seem like they're meaningfully enforced in the first place. I suppose that's where the importance of participating in these larger organizations, such as the MAS in my case, is so important. A single individual is easy to dismiss, whereas organizations are less so. Equally as important, probably even more so, is continued community outreach. At the end of the day, pressuring legislators as professionals will not be enough. It's the greater population, legislators' constituencies, which hold the actual power to spur change. Having excavated at the Olsen site for 2 years, being a part of the public archaeology days that are held there, and also having worked at museums in the past, I know that people do care about heritage. I suppose the challenge lies in spreading awareness for the need for change and getting that across in a way that doesn't make people afraid of that change being at the cost of some large negative impact to themselves or how they live their lives. I feel another important area to focus moving forward should be the continued fostering of new students interested in heritage towards actual involvement. I can only speak for my own personal experience, but through my 5 years as an anthropology student at U of M, I only encountered 2 anthropology classes which covered topics relating to Manitoba. And even then, it was only a smaller part of the larger discussion. I feel as though not offering locally relevant courses for anthropology students at a university as large as U of M is a huge missed opportunity. There's extensive research conducted in regions such as Africa and the Near East. However, U of M's actual involvement in research relating to Manitoban archaeology seems minimal in comparison, at least coming from an undergraduate student's perspective. Now, to wrap things up, I suppose I'll briefly recount one more time some of the more important aspects of what I've talked about. Firstly, upon entering my first year at the University of Manitoba, I was completely unaware of any information relating to archaeology in Manitoba and had never even heard that excavations had been done here. Now, it's certainly possible I just got extremely unlucky in this regard. However, ensuring that people are aware of the existence of the different kinds of forms that heritage can take in Manitoba is certainly, I would say, a good place to start. Second, the legislative framework surrounding heritage currently leaves much to be desired. Real change, while certainly a daunting task, is possible if approached properly. And third, as an anthropology major at U of M, I think it would be great to see U of M increase its focus on anthropology and archaeology in Manitoba. I think this increase in focus would not only help increase local engagement with anthropology and with heritage, but also increase the number of youth who pursue further education in anthropology and archaeology and other heritage-related fields. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caleb. That was really interesting. Our next panelist is Joel Firman, who's also a fifth-year honors anthropology student at Brandon University. Upon the completion of his undergraduate degree, Joel also plans to work in cultural resource management before moving on to complete a graduate degree. Joel is the Brandon University student representative for the Manitoba Archaeological Society, and he has a keen interest in all aspects of archaeology, but is most interested in lithics from the early pre-contact period. Joel looks forward to a future in archaeology, wherever that may be. Today, Joel will be discussing his experiences in archaeology and paleontology, and how these experiences have helped shape his desire to pursue archaeology and how he has benefited from these opportunities. So thank you for joining us today, Joel.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good. I'll just share my screen here really quick. All right, good. You can see this all? Hold on, I need to hide this. All right. I'll be talking about my opportunities in Manitoba archaeology. So, like you said, I am a fifth-year anthropology student. I'm also one of the recent recipients of the Manitoba Archaeological Society scholarships, among others, since 2018. I received the MES award for my dedication that I show to both my education and my career path, as well as my willingness to volunteer my time. I have a keen interest in both the recent and extremely distant past. Most of my time at Brandon University has been dedicated to studying archaeology, but I've also been known to show an interest in paleontology and not shied away from opportunities to participate in paleontological field work, although that is not my chosen career path or field of study. Living in Manitoba has given me a lot of opportunities to get my feet wet in both archaeology and the heritage sector. These opportunities have been extremely beneficial in helping me pursue my career, helping me pursue my interest in a career in archaeology. The opportunities and work I've done in Manitoba have served as excellent moments to learn and to develop professional connections. These connections will hopefully be beneficial in my post-university period of my life. Before I became involved in archaeology, I had the opportunity to volunteer my time with paleontological fieldwork on the Manitoba Escarpment. I volunteered many days of my life to participate in this fieldwork alongside the Manitoba Geological Surveys and to aid a master's student from the University of Manitoba with the collection of information for his master's thesis. While this work may not be directly related to archaeology, these field expeditions have been extremely beneficial to me personally. Firstly, these excursions have showed me that I very much enjoy doing field work. If I have to slog through the bush, mud, or creeks to get to the information, so be it. That's half the fun. During my paleontology days, I learned a lot about the aquatic fossil record of Manitoba during the Cretaceous period. I also learned how to measure and map geological formations. And I learned some of the differences in the stones and materials that make up the sedimentary layers of Manitoba's Cretaceous period. These days and weekends spent in the field helped me develop an early interest in Manitoba and its rich past. I also never knew there was just how far back the ground could take us in Manitoba. So in this picture here, there's a person for scale here. We mapped this entire rock face from the bottom to the top. Basically, we measured all the geological layers of the Keld member. The last measurement that was done was in 2014, and it was done visually from across a river. So we actually got up to it in person, and we measured over 20 meters of geological layers. This is the same face that we measured, but just from up top where we scaled the cliff. This on the right is a Squally-Corax tooth. It's a type of shark from the Cretaceous period, so it's roughly 92 million years old. And this fossil here was a Ichthyodectes fish vertebrae section. Once I started my days at Brown University, the opportunities to continue to grow, and my interest in Manitoba's more recent past continued. During the summers of 2019 to 2021, I worked at the Fort Dauphin Museum as one of the students hired to do summer work. Since I was involved in a degree related to archaeology, I was given a job as a lab collections assistant. My time at the museum was extremely beneficial to my desire to become a professional archaeologist. The most beneficial part of working at the museum was the sheer quantity of artifacts I was able to handle and learn about. This is the building I worked in, which is the Parkland Archaeological Laboratory. The Fort Dauphin Museum collection hosts an impressive diversity of fossils and artifacts from the Cretaceous period to the early pre-contact period to the fur trade to the pioneer period, and even materials as early as World War II. I was able to familiarize myself with many of the artifacts and archaeological remains commonly found in Manitoba. A majority of the artifacts I was exposed to were lithics in the form of projectile points, other stone tools, and debitage. I was also exposed to a whole host of pottery fragments from decorated rim sherds to plain body sherds. This time at the museum really aided me in being able to visually identify artifacts in both fragmentary or complete form. It also exposed me to some of the chronology of Manitoba's archaeological record, as well as some of its site distribution. The Fort Dauphin Museum also supplied me with information from the fur trade and pioneer periods. The countless hours spent in the lab at the Fort Dauphin Museum have been extremely beneficial to my archaeological aspirations. Being exposed to that many artifacts, even before taking courses directly related to lithics or pottery or faunal remains, gave me a strong baseline level of knowledge that made learning about artifacts and ecofacts so much easier in the classroom due to my existing familiarity, whereas many other students may have not had the same level of exposure as I did. The Fort Dauphin Museum, I guess in this photo here, we have a fulsome projectile point on the left. Not much is known about this. We don't really have any records about it. And on the right is a incised or decorated hide flesher. The Fort Dauphin Museum also taught me how to design, research, and create displays on a variety of topics related to both archaeology and later periods in Canada's history. Creating displays taught me how to make visually appealing collections of items that are both informative, relevant, and easily understandable to guests, regardless of their knowledge of the past. So this display here was a display I created on Bison occidentalis. This is a Bison occidentalis skull. I also created a variety of displays around dolphins. So this one went into the library. It was a little display on pottery and decorations in Manitoba. And I also put some other ones about like the Spanish flu and the Paulson bombing and gunnery range just outside of Dauphin, which went to local banks. The Fort Dauphin Museum also taught me how to correctly catalog and store artifacts at a level acceptable to museums in Manitoba. My familiarization with artifact cataloging has certainly been beneficial in my more recent archaeological ventures. However, in all instances that I've done cataloging, the interface has varied. In addition to cataloging, the museum taught me how to properly store artifacts, especially for a long period of time. learned how to maintain an environment that resists artifact degradation and preserves knowledge for future generations. Without a doubt, the knowledge of artifact cataloging and storage will be useful in future archaeological or heritage applications. Finally, the Fort Duff Museum has taught me how to interact with the public and organize and set up events. At the museum, especially before the pandemic, we were constantly hosting and organizing events for the public. Museum staff, myself included, were responsible for giving clear, informative, and interesting tours of important historical buildings and displays. My paleontological fieldwork was also extremely beneficial here, as tours included a section of fossils from Manitoba escarpment near Dauphin, and I was able to provide accurate and informative information about the wide collection of Cretaceous and later period fossils in the larger museum collection as a whole. For me, developing my skills with public relations has been very beneficial to my archaeological aspirations. In a field that is very easy, I find it very easy to interact with the public when they visit the sites and talk about the past in a way that is informative without being overly complicated by jargon that is only meaningful to professionals. Overall, my time at the museum was extremely important to my development towards becoming an archaeologist. It was nice to work in a setting where I could learn at my own pace and explore the past. It also really jump-started my desires to pursue Manitoba archaeology as a career. I developed a larger interest in Manitoba's past and its archaeological record. I think my time at the museum really showed me just how prevalent archaeological sites in Manitoba and the extreme amount of work, care, and love that is needed in this province for its archaeological remains. My time at the museum also showed me just how much work is needed off-site and how there are so many sites housed in the back of museums that are at risk of being lost to history due to a lack of research being conducted on already excavated sites. A lot of sites housed at the museum represent artifacts from surface collected contexts. However, many of these sites have diagnostic artifacts, which can still provide some information about the sites, even though the exact context is lost forever. These artifacts are still deserving of the attention of archaeologists and scholars as a whole. Pictured here is a Xiphactinus fish fossil. This is approximately 4 feet wide by 3 feet. It's just another vertebral column with ribs. This one's roughly 100 million years old. The museum also boasts a fossil from the Terminonaurus robusta, which is a 1 of 7 or 1 of 6 known specimens. It's not pictured here. If you want to see it, go to the museum and check it out yourself. All right, another opportunity that I was able to participate in was archaeological field school at the Good site southwest of Souris. This was mandatory for me to complete if I wanted to pursue archaeology in the future, so I ended up taking the course early in my university career. For me, this was an extremely eye-opening experience. For the first time, I was able to get out into the field and do real archaeology. First time I was becoming directly involved in the uncovering of materials that had not been seen for about 600 years, which was about the relative age of the site. Field school was one of the best experiences I can recall in recent years. Under the supervision of Alicia Gooden, I was able to learn how to properly excavate a 1 by 1 meter unit via trowel and take relevant field notes. Additionally, all of us students had to complete all the required paperwork, including level summary forms, unit summary forms, wall profiles. And additionally, we had to learn how to create a report about our units and how they related to the site as a whole and what they meant. These experiences really helped me reaffirm to me that this was a career path I would enjoy doing. Field school also introduced me to new ways of cataloging artifacts and got me familiar with using a different interface for entering information. Without a doubt, field school was highly beneficial. It was extremely informative, and it was nice to be able to experience the firsthand collection of pre-contact Manitoban history. It was nice to also see what archaeological fieldwork was like, and to kind of be given the chance to back out of it, I felt like it was a career path that wasn't right for me. However, field school only made me more excited to pursue a career in archaeology. The first time I was able to reconstruct a site in my head and envision how real people lived and the activities they're taking in several hundred years ago. So yeah, this is the Good site and the excavation going on. On the right is a photo of my nearly complete 1 by 1 meter unit. Here's some of the stuff I found. I found a lot more than this. It was mostly just fragmentary bones. But on the left, I found an articulated proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanx of a bison and a fragmentary mandible. Recently, I became involved as the student representative for Brandon University at the Manitoba Archaeological Society. Being able to participate in executive activities has been great. Lots of volunteer opportunities have presented themselves, but the only issue is that most of the opportunities are near Winnipeg and not exactly close to Brandon, where I live. This is a challenge, as I have not really been able to attend many of these opportunities. It is very difficult as a student to take time away from my studies to travel somewhere especially with how much it costs to travel now. This is becoming increasingly difficult to do with a student budget. My hope for the future is that there's more volunteer opportunities that appear near Brandon. Even if I'm no longer living in Brandon, I still hope the future students for archaeology get to have opportunities to interact with the public and share this profession with others. Being part of the MAS has still been beneficial, as it allows me to establish more professional connections and to develop a more attractive resume for my future, which hopefully remains in archaeology. Furthermore, through the MAS, opportunities such as this one today have become available to me to become more involved in the protection of Manitoba's past. And this is just a picture of the Olsen site where I volunteered some of my time in 2021. This summer, I was able to get my first job in an archaeological field position. I was able to work at the Pearson Wildlife Management Area as a senior field and lab assistant. This position was highly beneficial as it served as a new learning experience and also a way to develop more professional connections. Most importantly, it was another opportunity to do real archaeology. This was not my first expedition to the site. In summer 2021, I volunteered my time to help excavate during public archaeology days. My time at the Pearson Wildlife Management Area this summer was further reinforcement for me and my desire to pursue archaeology as a career in the future, and represented further opportunity to become involved in Manitoba archaeology. It was also very inspiring to work at the site that is so important to Manitoba's pre-contact story. The Pearson Wildlife Management Area is home to the Olsen site, which represents one of Manitoba's only known possible pre-contact horticultural sites. And to be involved in such an important project was nothing less than perfect. The Pearson Wildlife Management Area excavations this summer were super beneficial to me. Under the guidance of Dr. Mary Mullaney, Dr. Sarah Hallwas, and Miss Alicia Gooden, I was able to learn how to do archaeology with even more skill and grace than I had done in the past. I learned how to properly shovel shave and how to complete test pits, how to expand excavation units, and how to better set up archaeological excavations. I also learned how to deal with the frustrations of digging through layers of gravel and glacial till, and how to change excavation plans when your test pits uncover a lot more than you expected. Additionally, the Pearson project gave me further experience with proper archaeological cataloging techniques. This experience further increased my love for this profession, and being able to interact with local Indigenous communities and to learn from them and to have the blessing of the people of Chanapawapka Dakota Nation was a very uplifting experience and was the cherry on top of an already delightful field season. It was so wonderful to have people like Greg Chatkana come out to the site and share his wisdom with us and to partake in ceremony alongside him. Here in the photos on the left, you can see the starts of one of the excavation units, and on the right is one of the test pits we started digging. And here is on the left, a hammerstone that I found in one of the units. You can tell it's a hammerstone based on the crushing present on this face right here. And on the right is just a very lovely picture of material visually similar to Knife River flint that I found. This year, I was also able to complete my honors project, which is the equivalent of a thesis in most other degrees. With the help of Dr. Mary Mullaney and in cooperation with the Fort Duff Museum, I was able to complete this project. I sorted through a large portion of the Fort Duff Museum collection, looking for projectile points dating to the early pre-contact period on the Manitoba Escarpment north of Dauphin. I then wrote a cultural and environmental history of the early pre-contact period with a focus on the Manitoba Escarpment. I thoroughly enjoyed this project, and it was very interesting to see just how dynamic the early pre-contact period was and to explore the lifeways of these groups. For me, this project was an incredibly important learning experience. It was a nice challenge to produce a piece of writing of this size, and it was great practice for a postgraduate degree, and to see if I really had what it takes to pursue a master's degree in the future. This project also gave me a deeper understanding and respect for the people and the environment of early pre-contact Manitoba. This project only furthered my interest in pursuing Manitoban archaeology and its study. It was nice to produce something. It was also nice to produce something that was of value for the Fort Duff Museum, which they can hopefully learn from, especially after all they've done for me. So yeah, in this photo here, this is a collection of some of the early pre-contact points from one of the sites. We have on the left is a Hell Gap point made of Swan River chert. The middle was just an undeterminate lancelet. It looks almost like an agate basin point, but it's not exactly correct. And on the right is a Scottsbluff base and a portion of the blade made from material visually similar to Knife River flint. It's just heavily patinated. And here's another point. This also looks like an agate basin point, but we put this one instead in the late plano parallel oblique complex because it has parallel oblique flake scars, which is not something you see on agate basin projectile points or the true agate basin projectile points from Agate Basin, Wyoming. Very recently, and honestly, surprisingly, I was given the opportunity to do field work with ground penetrating radar and other remote sensing equipment. Due to the nature of the work, I cannot speak exactly on what work we were doing. However, this was still a wonderful experience. It was great being able to work alongside geophysical experts who could teach me how to use ground penetrating radar and to better understand how the data was being collected. It was also nice to see some of the results of the work that was being done and to begin to understand what the data was telling me. In addition to operating the GPR, I was also able to operate a drone, take a bunch of aerial photography for the purpose of creating a 3D model of the project area. This was a wonderful experience, and it was great to become familiarized with some more of the methods and tools that are sometimes used in archaeological applications. So as a whole, Manitoba has been very good to me, and there's lots of opportunity for young aspiring archaeologists to test the waters in the heritage sector and to learn from professionals before even completing a degree or entering university. Manitoba and the opportunities I have participated in have fostered a deep desire to work in archaeology upon the completion of my degree. All the opportunities I have been able to participate in have been positive experiences. Never have I woken up and dreaded a day in the field or regretted the choices I have made to where I am today. Manitoba has allowed me to establish good connections with people relevant to study of archaeology, and I hope I have made good impressions on them as well. I guess the question is, then what do I plan to do in my post-degree period of my life? All of my experiences have provided me with a desire to pursue cultural resource management archaeology, especially while I am still young and of able body. I truly enjoy being in the field and lab, and I would love to continue to do that as a full-time career should circumstances allow. Additionally, I would like to stay in Manitoba. Manitoba has such a rich and interesting archaeological record that deserves the attention of professionals and the next generation. I've spent so much time becoming involved in Manitoba's archaeological practice and developing friendships and connections with people. I hope to continue working in the future in Manitoba. However, I have no delusions about pigeonholing myself into a career limited to Manitoba archaeology. Despite all the time and effort I have spent developing myself to be a Manitoban archaeologist, I do not want to fall victim to the sunk costs fallacy. Instead, ideally, Manitoba would be my first choice for an archaeological position, but should the opportunity present itself elsewhere, I would be silly to turn it down. This is all just speculation, however, and being so young, I still have so much to learn. And I imagine, if not in the near future, my paths will likely cross with Manitoba's at some point again. But the world is my oyster, and there is so much opportunity out there that it's hard to imagine me remaining bound to Manitoba forever. I plan to keep jumping at the opportunities presented to me in the hopes that I have something yet to learn. Hope for the future that more opportunities become available for all students across Manitoba to get a taste for archaeology and all its flavors. I feel the upcoming generations and the public would benefit from increased opportunities in the heritage sector. I feel it would also be better for more attention and awareness to be brought to the heritage sector. For me personally, most of the opportunities arose from my conversation, from my connections, and just word of mouth or local newspapers. Perhaps more mainstream advertised opportunities would be beneficial, especially for the current generation who are becoming increasingly distanced from certain aspects of media, like the radio and newspaper. However, it is impossible to know what the future holds for any of us. It is my hope, however, that this is just the beginning of my story in archaeology, and opportunities continue to come not just my way, but to others as well. And that is all I have.
Thank you very much, Joel. That was great. Up next, we have Drenna Lameg. Drenna is a senior undergraduate student completing her honors degree in anthropology at the University of Manitoba. Since completing her archaeological field school in 2021, Drenna has participated in excavations in Manitoba, the Yukon Territory, and the Northwest Territories. After completing her bachelor's, Drenna plans to work in Manitoba Cultural Resource Management before pursuing a graduate degree. Drenna has been involved with the MAS since the fall of 2021 and especially enjoys outreach events with school-age youth and adolescents. She believes that spreading awareness about the importance of local cultural heritage starts with the next generation. Drenna looks forward to spending her career sharing knowledge of local history and archaeology with Manitobans. The presentation will highlight current research on human casts discovered in the University of Manitoba Anthropology Department's collection, and the roles of Morton Cranial Collection and the Charles H. Ward Laboratory in the collection, distribution, and reproduction of human remains for profit. So thank you very much for joining us, Drenna.
Hi, it's great to be here. There's been lots of good presentations today. Let me just see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There we go. It's up now.
It's up. You can see my presentation.
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, so hi everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg is located within Treaty Number 1 territory, and that the province of Manitoba is situated on Treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 9 territories. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we appreciate the opportunity to live and learn on these traditional lands. We dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. My name is Drenna Lameg. Like Karen said, I'm an anthropology student in my final year of an honors degree at the University of Manitoba, and I've been involved with cultural heritage since 2021 with the completion of my archaeological field school at Brandon University. Today, I'm going to be presenting on a project that I've been working alongside with Dr. Benjamin Collins, an assistant professor at the U of M. And we have been tracing the narrative for Indigenous Southern African castes in the U of M's Anthropology Lab collection. So first, some background information on the project. While going through some of the older collections in the University of Manitoba's Anthropology Lab, 5 human skull casts were discovered in the hominin collection. Of the 5 casts, 4 of them were identified as Indigenous peoples from South Africa, and 1 was identified as an Indigenous person from Australia. While the casts were identified using the lab catalog, there was no clear provenance except for 1 individual who had a stamp indicating it was from the anatomical laboratory of Charles Ward and had come from the University of Pennsylvania. It would seem that the casts were added to the collection in the 1960s from the Medicine College or the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Further investigation into the anatomical laboratory of Charles Ward indicated that it regularly distributed human remains and casts to educational institutions and private collections. We also looked into the University of Pennsylvania, which is where the Morton collection is housed, another anatomical collection that's known for the acquisition of human remains without the consent of the individuals for the purpose of educational or private gain. Considering this context and that the casts were obtained by the University of Manitoba in the 1960s without a clear provenance, we're concerned that the casts were made unethically and without the consent of the individuals, their families, or their descending communities. The San are the oldest inhabitants of Southern Africa. San is usually used to refer to a diverse group of hunter-gatherers who reside in Southern Africa and share historical and linguistic connections and characteristics. Mohammed Adakari, a lecturer at the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Cape Town, recounts David Krukier, the leader of the Khoikhoi San, expressing that his people have been made into nothing, in reference to how hunter-gatherer societies of the Cape Colony have been heavily influenced and oppressed by the impact of European colonialism. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Dutch-speaking pastoralists infiltrated the interior Cape and dispossessed its indigenous inhabitants. When colonial movements were met with resistance from the Cape San peoples, colonists would form mounted militia units whose goal was to eradicate the San bands. A driving force behind the blatant violence towards the San was the influence of Western racist thinking. Governing bodies and settler ideals effectively dehumanized hunter-gatherer lifestyles and utilized the traditional way of living as a method of proving racial inferiority of the San, comparing their lifestyles to that of animals. Depictions of the San merely inhabiting the land rather than making the settler ideal of productive use of it reinforced the colonial justification for their dispossession. Because foraging subsistence strategies were irreconcilable with those of the settler economy, colonial society viewed the lifestyles of the Cape San peoples as something to be eliminated, whether that be through outright extermination, forced acculturation into subordinate status in the colonial order, or through segregation via reserves. Given this context of irreparable damage and hurt directed towards Cape San peoples for colonial purposes, we're now concerned that the time frame that the casts came to be in the anthropology lab, how the University of Manitoba obtained the skull casts of San individuals, and the context that the casts would have been made in. Charles Howell Ward was an osteologist and preparator of anatomical models. He was the son of Professor Henry A. Ward, the founder of Ward's Natural Science Establishment in Rochester, New York. Charles Ward joined his father's business in the Department of Human Anatomy in 1885. It was in 1899 that he left the Department of Human Anatomy and he founded the Charles H. Ward Anatomical Laboratory. At the time, Ward's new business was self-proclaimed to be the only establishment within the United States to deal exclusively in anatomical preparations. The laboratory had earned a reputation of producing skeletons, bone models, and other products in their catalog at the lowest prices possible for the materials that were obtained. This slide demonstrates what the entries and order forms from the catalog distributed by the Ward Laboratory looked like. Here you can see that anatomical specimens are described, given a catalog number and an associated price. We recognize that access to reference and teaching collections of human skeletal remains is an integral part of research and learning within the fields of biological anthropology, archaeology, and anatomy. There are many things that we can learn from human remains, such as age, sex, ancestry, or even cause of death. However, the question of ethical collection and distribution is what's most troubling to us. I want to put a quick trigger warning here before I go on to the next slide. The following slide does contain catalog entries and an advertisement for the products that were sold at the laboratory that use offensive and upsetting terminology that is in no way appropriate when discussing individuals of diverse ethnic backgrounds. So if you don't feel comfortable, I'll let people know when I move on to the next slide so you don't need to look. We do believe that it's important to discuss and recognize the history of the field of anthropology and archaeology, even if they're difficult conversations to be had. And unfortunately, this is part of that history. The image on the left is from the same catalog that was shown on the previous slide, but with more concerning content. And the image on the right is an advertisement of the laboratory and the products that it has available for its patrons, as was published in The Open Court, which was a monthly magazine that was devoted to the religion of science. This advertisement was printed in an issue of the magazine from April of 1904. These catalogs and advertisements would have been distributed to all kinds of institutions and would have been made available to a wide audience of people. This just helps demonstrate how easy it may have been to obtain products from the Charles Ward Anatomical Laboratory. It's especially concerning considering that it's unlikely that the majority of specimens offered by the institution would have been obtained in an ethical manner, making their distribution even more troubling. So we're on the next slide now, and I'm going to talk about the Morton Cranial Collection. Samuel George Morton was a physician, an anatomy professor at the Pennsylvania Medical College, and an active member of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. Morton began his career in craniology when he began collecting skulls in 1830. He was preparing a lecture on the form of the skull as seen in the 5 races of men, but he had, in his own words, determined that the skulls he would need could neither be bought nor borrowed. Morton eventually amassed a collection of 867 human skulls. He recorded the date that the skull was acquired, as well as the racial or ethnic grouping of the skull and whatever information his supplier had sent him. Following his death in 1851, the collection was purchased by the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia and was eventually relocated to the Penn Museum in 1966. Since then, the collection has increasingly attracted scholarly attention and has been actively studied, researched, and published. The Penn Museum has since made efforts to reject scientific racism and acknowledges the role that Samuel Morton and his collection had in the efforts to justify slavery and the unethical acquisition of human remains. The Penn Museum and the University of Pennsylvania have since apologized for the unethical possession of human remains in the Morton collection, and they are actively taking the necessary steps towards repatriation and burial. Given all this information, we reached out to colleagues in South Africa and Australia for guidance on how to proceed with the casts that were found in the U of M's collection. From South Africa, we reached out to Rebecca Ackerman from the Department of Archaeology at the University of Cape Town, Robin Humphreys from the University of the Western Cape, Wendy Black, the Chief Curator of Social History and Art at Iziko Museums of South Africa, Krista Kulian, a Research Associate at the University of Witwatersrand, and from Australia, we contacted David Doble, the Director of Indigenous Repatriation and Collections and Cultural Access from the branch of the Office for the Arts. From these individuals, the guidance that we received consisted of the following: that both South African and Australian contacts recommended the immediate removal of the casts from any teaching collections, that further provenance research be done on the casts that we had in our possession, and that the South African colleagues recommended that the destruction of the casts. You may have noticed I don't have any photos of the casts that were from the collection. It was also recommended that any photo evidence also be destroyed. So that's why you're not seeing any of it. ongoing and future directions. So the plans that we have moving forward is to potentially host a colloquium with Robin Humphreys from the University of the Western Cape. Her research aims to understand what it means to practice community archaeology in Cape Town, especially in regards to human remains. There is a tension between bioarchaeologists who find remains as a source of information about the past and descendant communities who view remains as ancestors. We believe that she will be able to aid us with engaging students and faculty in a discussion around why the casts that we have are unethical and why it's important for the department to reflect on its own history. We also hope that this kind of engagement can be a first step towards ongoing discussions within the department about the dissemination of this topic or others similar to it. The preliminary recommendations that we would make to others on this topic is that there needs to be an open and ongoing discourse with stakeholders from communities, and that educational and governmental institutions work to develop strategies for engaging with this challenging part of our past. We also recommend that any kind of casts similar to those that we discovered at the University of Manitoba that are lacking a clear provenance should be removed from teaching collections or displays. From there, we would recommend that casts without clear provenance should be further studied and that proper engagement should be conducted. To conclude, we believe that it's worth noting that there are no current guidelines and there's very limited discussion revolving casts and how to approach situations where they're believed to have been made and distributed unethically. There's a limited amount of discussion revolving around the appropriate ways to navigate the repatriation or the next steps of unethically sourced casts, but we hope that by sharing the information that we have, we can work towards furthering discussion on the acquirement and distribution of human remains and casts. We would like to acknowledge Rachel ten Bruggencate, the laboratory supervisor at the Anthropology Lab at the University of Manitoba, Derek Johnson, the department head, the rest of the University of Manitoba's Anthropology department for their support throughout this project. And we would also like to thank all the individuals that we have contacted for their guidance on this topic. Rebecca Ackerman, Robin Humphreys, Wendy Black, Krista Coulian, and David Doble. Thank you all for your time, and that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Jean. That was very interesting. I quite enjoyed that. So our final panelist for the day is Daniel Guenther. Daniel is a passionate advocate for our city and our province. He is chair of the Garden City Residents Association and co-chair of the Friends of West Kildonan Library Board. Daniel is a champion for built heritage, advocating for the recognition of Winnipeg's vast and diverse architectural history. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Winnipeg. And after 10 years with Manitoba Civil Service, Daniel was accepted into the Architecture Master's Preparation Program at the University of Manitoba. In his spare time, Daniel is an avid gardener and volunteers with organizations, including the Monarchist League of Canada. So welcome, Daniel, and looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for having me here today to share in my capacity as co-chair of the Friends of West Kildonan Library, and on behalf of our board, just to be able to share our community story of saving our beloved local library and now moving it forward into a positive news item to not only save it, but to request heritage designation, which is proceeding. So I will share my screen here. So I'm not sure who all here has been to West Kildonan Library. It is a beloved jewel opened in 1967. So as a bit of background, for those who might have not have heard, this past April, the city announced that they would be closing the West Kildonan Library in favor of moving the library services for the neighborhood to the Garden City Shopping Center. When the plan was announced, it caught a lot of residents off guard, as this library is actually considered quite modern. It's fully accessible, and in short, it's just a fantastic space. There are some upgrades, obviously, that need to be done, but there are no glaringly bad qualities to the space, and so it definitely caught the neighborhood off guard. So as I sit on the Garden City Residents Association, we started to hear from residents in our neighborhood, as this is the closest library to Garden City. But we also started to connect with our other residents associations, including Evan Crosney, who is the chair of the Seven Oaks Residents Association over on the other side of the tracks closer to the library. So we just started to talk and started to listen, because I think that's what was missing from the city's plan, was they had not listened to the neighborhood. They actually hadn't approached anyone in the neighborhood to ask them about where they want to see their library services, or do they enjoy the current library services. And if they had done that, they would have been able to avoid a lot of this media coverage and a lot of the whole blow up of the event, which I'll get into a little bit later. But just to start with, that it's a lesson in connecting with your neighbors, and this goes beyond just online. Of course, there was chatter online on social media regarding the plans for this library, but actually going and knocking door to door, talking with your neighbors, picking up the phone and connecting what we might call the old-fashioned way to actually get the temperature of the neighborhood and understand how people are feeling on the subject. So I just wanted to give a little bit of history on this library. It's an absolutely fantastic space. It was opened in 1967 as a Canadian Centennial Project. And some research that I did this summer digging through the archives revealed that not only is this a very special community hub, but it is considered an architectural jewel. It is a modernist building, but contrary to modernist buildings built elsewhere in North America, this one in particular here in Winnipeg has actually been designed with a lot of Manitoba materials, notably the Tyndall stone on the exterior that also carries all through the interior. And it's worth noting that because the architect was a graduate of the University of Manitoba here in Winnipeg, and he also was a local prolific architect. He kind of flew under the radar. His name is Mr. George A. Stewart, but everyone that we talked to, including former colleagues, people who crossed paths with him during his career, said that he was one of the most just incredible people that you probably had never heard of. And he designed West Kildonan Library for the then city of West Kildonan. It was a separate area, but he designed it and he had quite a large budget. He did design two other libraries in the city of Winnipeg, including the St. Vital Library branch and also the Fort Garry Library. But he had a considerably larger budget for the city of West Kildonan. And that was because back in the early 1960s, the city of West Kildonan, because it was separate, their residents couldn't use any city of Winnipeg libraries. And so the city got together after hearing from residents that they wanted a library, and they actually raised considerable funds through special tax levies to build a library. And the city wanted the best library in the greater Winnipeg area. They toured all the libraries with 6 prestigious architects of the time and asked the architects to come up with what they felt would be the most superior library branch in the city of Winnipeg or in the greater Winnipeg area. And what we have here is what opened up in 1967, which has remained a community hub and a beloved, well-used site for many, many years. This is the library today, as you might see it. It is at the corner of Jefferson and Powers in a very dense residential area, but it is located in what we call the community campus, surrounded by, there's 4 schools, a daycare, a large park, the arena across the street. So definitely it could be considered downtown West Kildonan. So as you can see here on my screen, the current West Kildonan Library is integrated into a neighborhood, and where they were wanting to move it over at the Garden City Shopping Center would have put it in the middle of a concrete jungle, and one that many residents identified as not being accessible. The city claimed that the shopping mall site would be accessible because it was on a bus route, which it technically is, and that they claimed to have more parking. Those are 2 issues that have never been raised by users of the West Kildonan Library because it has considerable parking behind it, considerable street parking, but it also is on the exact same bus route that goes to Garden City Shopping Center. The biggest hurdle is that pedestrians can't access the site safely. In fact, just over 2 years ago, there was a woman tragically killed in the back parking lot crossing the space where people would be crossing to access the proposed library site. And the other thing that really caught our residents off guard was that the library site was going to be in the former Sears wing of the building, but it was actually going to be in a unit that the mall has been unable to lease out in almost 4 years. And it was a unit that had become landlocked because the mall had sold off different pieces of that wing and ended up with this real hokey, if you want to call it, landlocked unit that had no exterior walls, and so it could have no windows. And so they were going to take our beloved library, which I will remind you is surrounded by windows, and they were going to put it in a windowless shopping mall unit. They were telling us it was going to be a fantastic modern library branch, and yet we started to dig through what the requirements of what a modern library branch are. And by using the city's own criteria that they put out, we realized that the proposed site at the Garden City Shopping Center would not even meet the minimum qualifications to be considered an acceptable modern library in the city of Winnipeg. And in fact, the current library branch that it's operating in met all the requirements. And so we started to get really frustrated saying, why are they moving this? And it was revealed that the city, which we know is very tight on funds, instead of growing the library services, they've come up with a plan to move library services out of older areas and move them to where new houses are being developed. And so in our area, that's moving it from West Kildonan further north to serve the suburbs that have popped up in the last 20 years north of the shopping center. Now, sorry, that's the proposed unit would have been smack dab in the middle there with no outdoor space, no sidewalks, really just a sad site. And so as a coalition, we actually went to tour the site because we thought we have to understand maybe the reasons why they're wanting to move it here. What are the pluses to this site? And when we visited it, it was really sad because we did visit the site where the lady was tragically killed crossing the parking lot. And we actually noticed pedestrians trying to cross the parking lots, and traffic is going every which way. And where we actually came to where you'd park your car, the spot where the lady was killed, the mall's solution was they put up signs that said, just don't cross here. And we found that completely unacceptable because not only are you arriving at the mall by car and you're trying to cross this spot, or from our residents in our neighborhoods trying to cross this spot. You can't just simply put up a no pedestrian sign and think that that's the improvement that would be needed to make this a safe parking lot. And so we went back to our current library and we just kept, trying to understand, why would the city want to move it? Why would the city want to give up this purpose-built space built by a prestigious architect, one that is well used? It's actually one of the largest library branches in the city. And why would they want to move it into a mall? And what we came up with is, we don't know. When we broke down the numbers of the proposed leased facility in Garden City Shopping Center, it costs more because right now the current library branch, they don't pay property taxes. They pay the utilities and they pay for the landscaping, but it is a city-owned site. When they would move to the mall, not only would they start paying lease costs, which are actually considerably higher, but they would also be paying a fee to the developer in lieu of property taxes. And they would be paying the proportioned fee of what the property developer has to pay for their property taxes. So it just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense financially, it didn't make sense from an accessibility standpoint. And time again, we actually heard from families saying, this location suits us. It's close to our schools. It's close to our homes. Our kids can walk, they can bike, they can go on their own. And if we move it to the mall, we can't let our kids take their bikes across that parking lot. And so what we actually started to do was reach out to some of the schools. We talked to the schools and they had questions about the issue. And so we talked to teachers, we went in on their lunch breaks, we talked to classes and we asked them. We didn't tell them that this was a bad idea. We wanted to gauge their opinions as well on this proposed move to the mall. And we heard resoundingly 100% that they were against moving it to the mall. In fact, we had some schools that were geographically much closer to the mall site say that this would be a bad plan for them because right now their kids could walk along the sidewalks to the current library. But if they would go to the mall, because they have to cross that parking lot, they would actually have to arrange bus transportation to go 2 blocks. So it was just this idea of we're taking it out of a walkable green neighborhood and moving it into a leased subpar facility in a mall. And so what we started to hear from students was they wanted to protest. And we thought, well, if they want to protest, we need to give them the opportunity to have their voice heard. So we quickly, in a matter of a couple of days, planned a rally, announced a date, invited speakers, and we just started connecting with everyone possible, both our city councilors, the mayor's office, former educators, current educators, the unions involved, and we tried to collaborate and talk with all the stakeholders who weren't talked to as part of this proposal to move it to the mall. And as you can see here, we had an incredible turnout. We had over 150 students march down from local schools, all with signs that they had made, and they wanted their voice heard, that they do not want this library moved into a mall. And what I think was most special was that the Seven Oaks School Division did not tell their students to participate in this. The students went to the school division and said, this is an important issue and we want to be involved in this. And the Seven Oaks School Division is very progressive. And they said, this is a lesson in civic engagement. And so if you need the time, if you want to participate, you have our approvals to walk down. And so students, teachers, educators, principals, everyone was walking down and the media showed up. And what ensued was a really great turnout and people having their voice heard. You know, this is democracy in action. And, you know, I don't need to remind everyone here, but we were coming off the heels of the Freedom Convoy, if you want to call it that, in the winter. And this was a beautiful demonstration for students to be able to have their voice heard in a peaceful way. It can be loud, but it can be peaceful. And for them to feel that they were having their say on a very important issue. And it was a very, very beautiful day and well covered by local media. And we actually had mayoral candidates coming out, and we started to find a lot of support, not just within our own community, but across Winnipeg. But where that support was strongest was within the youth. And I think that's another beautiful moment, is that in 2022, we have this many young people engaged on a public library. And this completely dispelled the myth that people don't use libraries anymore. There was stories time and time again from students saying they go there to do their homework, they go there to use the computers, they go there to get textbooks for school. And it showed that this library is just as essential in 2022 as it was in 1967 when it opened. And we had great turnout from the community as well. Neighbors, just people from across communities, but we actually had people showing up from across the city of Winnipeg and saying, what is happening here is a bellwether, because if they move this library, the other community libraries are next. If they close and move West Kildonan, next will be St. Vital, or next will be Westwood. And so people said, we have to stop this in its tracks, because this is not the type of city that we want. And we couldn't agree more. And so the ensuing media coverage obviously helped, but we contacted and collaborated with elected officials. At the very beginning, we were told this is a 100% done deal. Even if you don't want, if we had unanimous council support, it was told to stop this, we couldn't stop this. This was a 100% done deal. And putting it in perspective, this was going on in April. They were going to be approving the lease in May, and the new library would have been open by September. And so this was also a lesson in being told something's a done deal does not mean back down. That meant that we had to give this a fighting chance. And even if this was going to proceed and we would lose the fight, we at least had our voices heard as a community. And importantly, the youth had their voices heard on a very important issue to them. And so Evan and myself, we ended up doing, I think it was upwards of about 10 presentations to City Council. Cindy Tugwell from Heritage Winnipeg was a very important ally in this and guiding us through all the committee processes, because as I'm sure many people on this panel and in the audience would know, that dealing with City Hall is not easy. They, I think, purposely make it tricky to get registered and by a certain time to make sure that you can speak. But even when we were speaking, there was times when we were cut off and we were told not to address a certain issue because it maybe strayed from the issue at hand. And what really caught us was that this is a really archaic method for communities to have their voice. Evan and I were, fortunate and privileged enough to be able to take the time off work or out of other commitments to be able to go down, but not everybody has that opportunity. So how can we modernize this process to make sure that our elected representatives are hearing people's opinions on these very important issues, like our heritage buildings? And where I think this I'd like to end is that, we were able to save the library. So in May, we went from the beginning of May, this was a done deal. And by the end of May, we had the mayor come out in support of us. We had council unanimously vote down the decision to move it. But we also started to collaborate to say, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And what we heard from our neighbors was that this building, the library, of course, is very important, but the building itself has such connections to our community, and the architecture has connections to our community. And so we talked to architects, myself being involved with the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Manitoba. I could recognize the value in this, but it was music to my ears to hear on people's doorsteps that they loved this architecture. As I'm sure other people here know that, sometimes getting people to appreciate modernist architecture is difficult compared to maybe grand buildings downtown, but to hear so much attachment to this modernist building, we knew that the time was right to proceed with heritage designation. And so in a complete, 180 from where we were, we actually then started to have unanimous support from our local councillors, Ross Eady and Debbie Sharma, to explore heritage designation. And that has been moving through the process this summer. And there should be the finalization of that sometime later this fall or early winter. And this will be really special to have a modernist building designated as a city historic site. And so we've now obviously moved towards this historical status for the library, but it's also a lesson in making sure, this panel, we're talking about innovation, and I would say that we need to start recognizing, we need to make sure our elected representatives recognize that the greenest building is the one that is already built. And how do we quantify, but also value and recognize the environmental value of an existing building? Yes, we could build the most LEED certified building somewhere in the city, but this one's already greener than that. And so how can we use and adapt our heritage buildings and make sure that they're first in line when the city is looking to expand their services, or local developers need to expand their services? Because we need to recognize the green value of our heritage buildings. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very passionate about a local library, but I'm also passionate about local architecture. I believe my contact information is online, but please don't hesitate to reach out whether you have any questions or just look to collaborate on anything, especially with the West Kildonan Library or other local issues that are important to you. This has been a pleasure and an honor, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Okay, we're running quite a bit over time, but I guess we probably have time for a couple of questions here. It's a little unclear as to who this is actually directed to, but probably either one of our first two presenters. It says, now that you have completed both academic courses and in the field real world training and work, what courses or training do you think is missing in post-secondary college association world? I guess that would be either Caleb or Joel.
I guess I'll go ahead then. I think Caleb touched on it a little bit and said, like, more courses on specifically in Manitoba archaeology would be nice. But I feel like if you take courses like arc method theory and artifact analysis, and you understand the chronology and what needs to be done, like learning about the history kind of comes second, especially, or not second, but kind of comes with it, especially when you go to the sites and actually participate in the events. Like, you learn a lot, but I think having dedicated courses to Manitoba archaeology would be good. Yeah, that's what I think, at least.
Great, thanks. And then we've got one more question that's for Drenna, that says, did you work with the USA program for the Human Remains NAG? I've heard about it, but I have no items related. The Royal BC Museum put out a digital book on repatriation, and would that be of use?
To answer the question, no, we haven't really looked into NAGRA because there isn't much in regards to human casts. NAGRA is generally within ancestral remains, right? There isn't much legislation regarding casts at all. As for the digital book on repatriation, I have not looked into that, but we'll be sure to take a look at that.
Great, thanks. Does anybody have any more questions before we run out of time here?
Karen, I think we are kind of out of time. We promised
Okay.
we'd try to finish at 4:30, so we're pretty much on the edge of that, if not a few minutes past. So thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you, Karen Froman from the Department of History of University of Winnipeg for being our moderator. That was wonderful. That was an excellent presentations, everybody. As a performer, I repeat this in my head oftentimes. You're never too old to learn from someone younger than you. And I think that that's